All right, welcome back to the Rebuild the Construction Mindset podcast. Today, Jenna and I are just gonna chit chat a little bit about psychological safety. And we already kind of pulled that on each other yesterday. We sat down to record this episode, and we were not in the mental state to kind of be recording. And I saw it in Jenna, and I just kind of said like, "Hey, are you all right?" And you know what? I had to admit I wasn't in the safe space to say anything, but I don't know why. But I think I was also not fully prepared and ready to do it. And I normally would just bounce off of Jenna, and I could see she was not in a good spot, or you were in a good spot. And it's like, maybe we should not do this today. So, good start to our podcast, our episode today.
I appreciate you calling me out yesterday because, yeah, would have made for a horrible podcast episode.
So, we're gonna kick it off today with hopefully a little bit better of energy, hopefully some resources for everybody to go to and read some more about psychological safety. But I think the first thing we wanted to kick off about was kind of some personal stories that we have with psychological safety, and more or less maybe like the failure of it, not really the success. So I'm gonna hand it over to you, Jenna, and see what you want to start with.
Yeah, you know what's funny is I was thinking about this and I was thinking about all the different times like that I've felt not psychologically safe, meaning that I didn't feel like I could speak up or that I could speak my mind. And it's actually funny, it goes all the way back to childhood. It's not even necessarily like on a job site or anything. I was always really embarrassed in school. I was the girl who always like got really red in the face whenever I would be asked a question in the middle of the class, and I would have to like, how teachers used to just call you out without you actually raising your hand and knowing the answer, right? So
Oh
I think
gosh.
that's where mine kind of stems from was that I had a teacher in, I want to say I was probably in third grade, maybe second grade. I can't remember which teacher it was, but they would always call us out without us raising our hand, right? So we weren't volunteering our answer. And they would ask us like what we thought. It wasn't even necessarily like a math question or anything that had an answer. It was, what are your thoughts on this, right? So we had to like come up with something on the spot. And I think I remember just being super embarrassed and having like, that my face would get really hot and I would stutter and I would talk really fast and I would always have this impending fear from talking. And I honestly think that's where a lot of my anxiety stemmed from, was because of that in my childhood and having those kind of teachers that would force it on you. And I think that's probably one of my first memories of not feeling psychologically safe. Obviously, at that point in my life, I didn't realize that that's what it was, because psychological safety is kind of a new term. I feel like that's kind of like risen in the last couple of years. Um, yeah, that was probably one of my first. And then going into more of like a career example, I haven't really had a whole lot of psychological safety other than, if I'm on a job site and I'm a new trade on the job site and, the MEP trades, all of like the structural steel and all of those kind of trades are already on the job site. They already have a rapport. They already have banter. And so going into the sub meeting is super intimidating, being a finished trade, because now you're walking in on a group of people that already know each other. So there's that exclusion kind of feeling that you have, right? Being a new trade and also being a woman. And not that they would ever make me feel like purposely feel bad for being a woman, but I guess it just the thought of like being in a room full of men that are like speaking their minds and, saying all these cuss words and like bantering back and forth about inappropriate things. And I'm just having to sit there and kind of keep my mouth shut because I don't know what they're talking about. And I don't, and obviously when I get to know the team and I get to know everyone, I start to chime in and I start to banter and I start to feel more comfortable. But
The
just
cuss words just keep flying.
yeah, yeah,
They start
yeah.
coming for you.
I love the cuss words, man. It's like it makes you feel like included. But so that's kind of my two examples. Kelly, what are some of yours?
Well, actually, before I go into mine, I was gonna back to your comment about learning it in school. I'm currently doing a study action team, and we're reading coactive coaching. And I think it was this last chapter, they hit on how, as children, we were taught that we need to know the answer instead of like questioning and like really like thinking and like can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something that's just like instead of like finding ways to problem solve and find different ways to do it and to continuously improve, we're taught to like know the answer. So I could see that. I didn't even think about it, but I totally could see that stemming back to just being in school, that you got to know the right answer. The tests are based on knowing the exact right answer. It's not really allowing you to grow and learn and being okay with having the wrong answer,
Hmm.
right? So I just wanted to hit on that I think we could put that in the notes, like coactive coaching. It's not the easiest book to read, but it touches on a little bit of that just in the coaching, just like learning how to be the coach of
Yeah,
the
that's cool.
coachee. So
That's cool.
uh my personal stuff, I would say I didn't go that far. I didn't go that far back, but I really like that you did. Um, I would say one of the first areas I think was a big part for me was working on a couple different projects, younger PM, and I was still in the mode that I have to know it all. I have to do it all, and I didn't know how to ask for help. And I didn't feel comfortable asking for help, right? I didn't want to admit that I needed it, that I didn't know what I was doing. And it really put me in a bad place mentally. I was overwhelmed. I had multiple projects. I was really overwhelmed. My boss had changed and I wasn't as comfortable with the new person. And I mean, I wasn't like the best with the other person. I was like new people that I was dealing with in like a 2 year span. So it was, I hadn't fully figured out where I was at that point, and I waited too long to ask for the help. And it created a bigger problem. And I got to a point where I just didn't even want to be there anymore. I was done. I wanted to get out of the city, out of the work, everything, because I was just so overwhelmed. And I just waited to the last minute to really ask for that help. So it was a mixture of myself being that stronghold and then also not feeling like I could go to the people above me. And I think it's also I didn't understand how to go to them and communicate well with them. Maybe they could have helped me earlier, but I didn't feel that safety. And so I just waited and I felt like I got to do it all. It's got to be perfect. So that's definitely something that I look back on, and I now know that I probably would have gone about that a different way if I could do that again. And that was like 9+ years ago, 9, 10 years ago. So I definitely would say I would do it differently.
Hmm. But I feel like, I mean, it's funny because we always blame the other person or the group of people that makes us feel not psychologically safe. But I also wonder if a lot of it is our own not feeling like it's our own confidence.
Yes,
Like
100%.
I think confidence plays a lot into psychological safety that people don't really talk about. You know, you could be in a group full of welcoming people and still not feel like you can bring something up because there's something that in your life that's happened where, you know, maybe you were called stupid your whole life. Maybe your parents or your siblings or whoever like made you feel like you were dumb and that anything you said was not important. And so that created this thing where now you have all these walls up and no matter how much someone else makes you try to feel included, you don't feel that way. You know, so it's like it's working on yourself while also making sure that you're creating that psychological safety for others as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's definitely it's a confidence thing. I think for me that I do have times that self-confidence is not there
Mhm.
still to this day. I think to me psychological safety is being willing to say I need help.
Mhm.
And that can be an ego, that can be a confidence thing. So just being willing to first say I need the help, being comfortable in a room, like you were saying, and to say something. But that's also it's a very uncomfortable thing, but it ties back into the confidence.
Mhm.
Stop assuming you know it all. Stop assuming you can do it all. Um, take that and realize, I think I heard it today, realize that almost everybody in the room probably has some type of like what's it? They're faking
Fear.
it.
Yeah.
No, they're faking it to a point,
Oh,
right? They don't know it all either, right? They had to be in your position at one point. So taking that and realizing it's okay to ask for help and then stepping up, saying something, questioning things, or even just being willing to say, like, I'm just not in the right space to discuss this right now. Or, yo, can you give me 15 minutes. I need to go, like, you just told me something impactful, really, really strong. I gotta go take time to really understand it. I think to me, it's a lot of that. You've got to take that time and being just saying something in lieu of just sitting there and walking out of the room going, man, I really wish I would have said something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think psychological safety for me, and I've listened to a few different podcasts on this too that have been super helpful for me to truly understand the concept of it, because psychological safety sounds kind of like frou-frou. It's like a very, like, the term is just very, I don't know, explain it. It's not something that, especially with men, a lot of men being in construction, not something that men would correlate with. Per se, it kind of goes hand in hand with the mental health and the kind of what Ty's thing about changing it to mental fitness. I feel like you could probably change psychological safety to something else that seems a little more enticing to learn about. But um, to me, psychological safety it's actually like it's being confident and having the growth mindset that you're going to grow by asking questions and by raising your hand. And yes, you might be the new person in the room, but you're not going to learn everything if you don't ask the questions, because everyone that knows all the answers is going to assume that you know the answers too. No one's going to assume that you don't know anything. And so you have to go into it knowing, like, I'm the new person in this situation. I'm the new person in the meeting. Or maybe you're, in a meeting with your operations manager and they're talking about, they have some financial term that you're like, I have no idea what that means. Like, should I know what that means? And you're afraid to raise your hand because now you're going to look like you didn't do your job correctly, or that, you don't know something or whatever. Just ask the question, because if you don't, you're going to go even further along in your career without knowing that thing, and I mean, I guess you can go research it afterwards if you really wanted to, but
I was about to make that joke. I was like, you write all the like acronyms down and then you like go into Google afterwards. Hopefully you find the right acronym.
right. But how much time are you wasting doing that instead of just being like, hey, sorry, what does that mean? Because it might mean something different in your organization.
That is very true. I mean, just even like out in the field when you look at, what some people do at their daily stand-ups, right? They may use similar words, but they mean something slightly different, right? Just
Mhm.
because it's a standard within the company to, let's say, use a weekly work plan, how each foreman super may use it slightly different. So just like understanding that is probably a big thing. So yeah, just asking the question.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So doing some more research on psychological safety, we came across 4 different levels of psychological safety, which I think makes so much more sense when you break it down. So there's 4 different levels of psychological safety. There's inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. And we can kind of dive into each of these and give some examples of it. But inclusion safety is basically feeling safe just being there, just being present in a group of people. So that means that if you're in a meeting, you're in a sub meeting, you're maybe with your project manager or with your boss or with your superintendent, if you feel safe and you just feel okay being there, you feel included being there, that is what inclusion safety is. It's basically feeling like you're not being excluded from the group. So, for example, like I was in a meeting where I showed up late. It was one of my first meetings, first sub meetings. I was sitting in the back because all the seats at the main table were taken. No one even acknowledged that I walked into the room. No one said anything to me. The general contractor didn't introduce who I was to the team, and I felt extremely excluded. I mean, it was very, and they even were talking about my company as if I wasn't there. And it just made me feel like I was definitely, like my psychological safety was, I had no levels of psychological safety at that point. I was zero. I was ready to walk out of that room and they probably wouldn't have even noticed. And so that's a good example for me was, I definitely did not feel inclusion safety, let alone any of the other levels. So
Yeah, and I think that ties in. It's like the first level is the basic level. I
mhm.
think that what we've learned is that's the start of the full run of psychological safety. If you have inclusion, you can move on to the next one, which
Mhm.
is
Learner safety, which basically means that you feel safe enough now to ask questions and
that
to
is.
learn what the answers are and to actually like try to figure out what people are saying, like going back to hey, what does that acronym mean? Hey, what is, even if you feel like it's a dumb question, like everyone says, there's no such thing as dumb questions. They say that because of your psychological safety, depending on the group, depending on if you're a new to a company, isn't to par. So you haven't reached that level two safety in your mind yet. And that's why you don't ask questions. And going back to the confidence thing, it could just be that that's just who you are. We just don't ever ask questions. So working on things like, you know, maybe doing the research, knowing the answer, and knowing like, and then asking the question. This might sound kind of stupid, but like if you know the answer to a question and you ask it anyway because you're trying to like work on your learner safety, I think that's a good way to do it because you're not coming off really dumb because you're like, oh yeah, and then you can talk to the answer a little bit, like once they answer back to you. Maybe that might make you feel a little less silly asking the question.
Yeah, I think also like some one-on-one time with maybe the person that you would normally ask it to, and maybe building up that confidence to going, oh, hey, if I would have asked this, what would have happened? Or hey, one-on-one, well, hey, why don't you bring that up? I'm sure there's other people that want to know about it. So I think sometimes starting off one-on-one with somebody can slowly grow that confidence that like, okay, yeah, I will ask it in that room
Hmm.
next time, which then leads into the contributor safety, which
Which means that you're actually providing feedback or you're providing like your thoughts um to the meeting or to the planning or whatever it is, like where you're raising your hand, you're saying, well, what if we also do this? Or, hey, I had a prior experience on a prior project. Here's my lessons learned. That's another way you can contribute is you're using your experience and no one can really come at you for having an experience, right? So it's feeling safe enough to say, hey, I have an idea. What do you guys think?
tying in that the learner safety, if you're doing like a one-on-one. So I know this really helped for me in feeling comfortable. I was on an IPD project, and so I'm sitting in a big room with a bunch of people, GC, owner, architect, engineer, people that I don't normally sit in a room with. And I would get that one-on-one with somebody. I had someone that would pull me aside and help me with that learner aspect. And yeah, that's a good question. You should bring it up in there. So I had someone helping push that confidence. So then once I started asking those questions and I felt like, okay, like it's okay. Like it's not the worst question in the world. It's not the stupidest question in the world. I just started contributing more and started going, well, what if we did this flow? What if we made adjustments here? Hey, why are we doing that? Like I started doing more once I just kind of built that confidence there. So to me, there's an aspect of either go in there and just do it or find somebody. And if you're that person on the other end, like if you see someone that seems to be like you were saying, Jenna, you're in the back of the room. Like if I was up at the front of the room, I'd be like, hey, there's someone in the back just sitting there. Let's bring them in and let's talk. Why are you here? Who are you? What company are you with? Like, don't just leave them sitting back there. Like, pull them out. And it can either be in the meeting or one-on-one, because then you'll start growing that. So to me, it's finding different ways on either end to find either a person to help you or, you just go in there and do it, which is extremely uncomfortable and probably one of the harder things to do.
No, I agree with that.
But I think that leads into that fourth level that once you're up there, you can start challenging. Now we're going to be, if someone tells you you need to get it done Friday, you can be like, no, I'm not. I've got XYZ. That's not going to happen. Here's the roadblocks. Here's the things I need out of my way. If someone's like, well, I don't care, like you have more confidence in, like, I wouldn't say talking back, but having that communication back and forth. You're moving up to that next step where you know that you have an understanding of your job and your position and what you can and can't do, and you know that your voice is going to be heard. And I think the other thing is we all realize just because your voice is heard doesn't mean you'll get what you want, but the goal is by this point, there's an understanding between the people you're communicating with that we're at that level. It's okay, because when we walk out of this room, we're still good. It comes back to respecting each other, trust, holding each other accountable, but you've got to build up to that. And that's, to me, challenger is if there's a group of people sitting there challenging each other, but at the end of the day, they're having laughs and having a good time and they're still moving forward, to me, that shows a really good culture of psychological safety, that everybody feels that way. It's different from challenging each other and it's yelling and screaming.
Completely different things. Well, and I think going off that, I mean, challenger safety is absolutely critical if you're in a certain level on a project, right? Like if you're the project manager, you cannot be at level 1 inclusion safety with your contractor team. Like you will literally get nothing done if you cannot communicate and you cannot, challenge and you can't contribute and you can't ask questions, then you are going to fail and the project's going to fail in hand with that. I mean, not just as a trade partner, but as a general contractor. If you don't feel that you are at level 4 with your owner or with the architect or with whoever else on your team, and you don't feel like you can challenge them, you're going to fail because now you're hiding, right? You're hiding behind your fears, which is really where psychological safety comes to play, is you're scared of looking a certain way. And I honestly think challenger safety and contributor safety is really, really difficult for people pleasers. Like I'm a major people pleaser and I've worked extremely hard, especially in this industry, that I want everyone to like me. That is my biggest attribute, but also my biggest fault. Like that in this industry makes it so hard for me to have conflict and to have, so because of that, I feel like I have really constructive conflict with my team members because I don't have an ego. I want them to like me. So I'm coming across like, hey, all these things are on fire and I need all these things from you, but I hope you have a really good day. Like that's kind of how I approach things because of that. But I have learned to be a people pleaser, but while also being able to hit that level 4 challenger safety level because I have taught myself that. I've created that confidence in myself and I've had to learn it. I mean, it's something that you have to work on. It's a growth mindset, which is where that term comes from, is you're constantly growing. And like we talked about earlier, it's not really up to, at least in my opinion, maybe that's not what psychologists would say, but in my opinion, psychological safety isn't really up to the people in the room. It's up to you.
I think it's a mixture. I think, like I was saying earlier with my where I was uncomfortable and very overwhelmed. It was definitely a me thing. But I think there's also an element that the people in that room, if it's one person or 20 people, they need to be aware and be allowing for people to step up and say things. They need to be transparent about it. They need to, not joke and laugh when someone does bring something up. I think it's we want the guys in the field to speak up, apprentices, anybody to speak up at a daily huddle, talk about what they're doing today, what are safety issues. We talk about, we want the guys to promote safety out in the field, but if they're not comfortable with their team and the people that are there, if that team is not giving them that support either, that confidence is a lot harder to just walk in and do. I would say, yes, it's a learned thing for me. Like, I'm at a point where I'm just walking in, and I'm probably faking half of it, but I'm walking in and I'll be like, let's go. I don't know half the people in this room, but I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to ask all the questions, right? Because I've learned that, like you were saying. But this is not something that's taught. It's not something that's out there you could take a class on. So I think there's an element that we need to be aware that you can't just tell people and speak to people and think that they're going to speak up if you don't practice being a role model in similar behaviors. So I think there is an element that person at the front of the room, in the room, needs to be aware of that. They need to listen to you. They're not on their phones. They're not, laughing about it. They're not having a side conversation. And if you're bringing up an issue, that you offer help with that. If it's a personal issue, right? Like, okay, let's figure it out. If it's a work issue, like, okay, let's understand it. How can we improve it? So I think there is an element that the other side has to be there. And if the other side's not there, there's only so much you and I can do walking into that room.
It's funny that as you're talking about we keep talking about being in a room, but something that we don't really, I just thought about is like your psychological safety levels are probably different behind the computer. When you're writing an email, like you can go from, you could be level 1 with that person in a room where you barely feel included, you barely feel safe being in a room with them, to level 4 where you're just challenging the heck out of them over via email because you can hide behind it, right? Like
keyboard warriors. I mean, that's like social media to the point. Keyboard warriors. We're all brave as hell when we're behind a keyboard, right? You get an email and you're like, oh, I'm so mad about that email, and you like start responding right away, right?
But would you say it to them in their face? Would you say that to their face?
No. That's why you take a moment, go step back. Well, and even you're saying room, but it could be individual. I could be with you, Jenna. All right, I'm at a 4, but I could walk out of this room right now and I could go, out with a friend that maybe we're not even at a 2 yet. Or let's say I'm going to a job site tomorrow and it's a brand new job site, so I'm at a 1. Maybe I'm gonna force myself, but I'm at a 1, right? It could literally just be the office setting. In where you are in the office, maybe you're like feel really comfortable, but you don't spend much time on another side of the office, so you don't feel it. I mean, it can change by walking 10 feet. Same thing on a job site, right? I mean, I think when I first started in the industry, like I kept walking out at break time and I was like, oh, everybody's standing there in their little groups and they're staring at me. And I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable. I don't feel like psychological. I mean, nothing happened to me, but there was like, I don't feel safe and I feel very awkward. Like everybody's staring at me. So it's like, there could so many different levels. Now I've gotten to a point where I'm like, I don't care, but it was new to me. I never experienced it before. So it's like, it can change job site, person to person, 10 feet walking in a building. It can completely change. And that is a mental load that I don't think we talk about either. I think before we cut off our conversation yesterday, I think we made the comment like, let's say you're in your, you are, say you're out with your guys out in the field talking to them. You're really comfortable with them. It's the guys you work with all the time. So you're like up at a 4 with them. You can challenge them. They challenge you. We're in a good place. You're now going to go into the GC trailer, or even if it's your manager's trailer and you're not at that level with them, right? So you're going from a 4 to maybe a 2 within 5 minutes. That is a massive mental load. So we're talking about that just office, that's happening in the field, right? Our guys are supposed to listen to us, but what if like someone else comes and starts talking to them and they don't know what they're supposed to be doing? They're like, well, Jenna just told me this. Now this person's telling me this. Like, what am I doing? Like, do I ask them questions? Should I call Jenna? I mean, there's so many things. We know what a job site's like. There's so many things happening. There's a mental load that's so much thinking we have to do just to like, and this is me, I'm such an overthinker. Like, I'm literally going, okay, I'm going into this meeting. Who do I need to beat? And I literally think that. I don't know if other people do, but I know I do. And it's probably because I'm a big overthinker. I'm like planning everything out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it also kind of ties in with the with the hierarchy of construction, right? Like the VPs of companies are going to be at a level 4 probably most of the time because they've already reached that level. They're not really, they can challenge each other. There's no one really above them challenging them. And then you've got our apprentices and our interns that obviously are super intimidated because they've got all these people above them. So they're at probably a level 1 like all the time. And so managers are need to be cognizant that their people below them are probably not feeling very psychologically safe in conversations with them because they're intimidated because you are my manager, and if I say something wrong or if I say something stupid, I'm going to be embarrassed. And embarrassment is one of the largest threats to people's mental health because you can break your arm and you can heal and barely remember it, right? You might have little pings here and there, but if you're embarrassed, if you had a really embarrassing moment, you're going to think about that moment for years. And you're going to constantly go back to that one moment of being embarrassed, right? And it might hinder, maybe you're at a level 3 and then you say something and someone kind of snaps back and you get defensive and you're embarrassed about the thing. You might drop back down to a level 1 where you don't feel included anymore. Level, right? Like the field level, there comes not just psychological safety, but how it correlates with physical safety and how we're always pushing physical safety, the four big safety things, like, oh, make sure you wear your PPE, make sure that you're strapped in, make sure that you're watching where you're walking, those kind of things. But people don't realize that like psychological safety ties directly into that. Because if you're not psychologically safe and you don't feel like you can bring something up, because I think Kelly, you mentioned this yesterday, if you're an apprentice and you're working with someone who has 40 plus experience in what you're doing, like what installation you're doing, and you see that they're doing something incorrectly or that they're doing something unsafe, or they're doing it because they're trying to cut corners, you don't feel safe enough to raise your hand and say, hey, I don't think you should be doing it that way because you're probably going to hurt yourself. That could potentially be life or death for that person.
True.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the hardest part. I mean, I think even you and me looking for resources for today, it's not something that's like, oh, construction specific. And, luckily today I found one, right? But there's not just like psychological safety specific to construction, right? So I think that's the big thing is showing what are the resources for those things that either your company has, or if your union has organizations, AGC, I think there's like a wall and ceiling organization. Looking for those organizations, they may have stuff. The problem is it's like it's not as well advertised out to the field.
Right.
You and I can spend the time to look on the computer, but those guys out in the field, they may not be. And I think that's one of the things. It's like, I know for my own mental health, there's times when I have questioned like getting help, and I still do, because there's a stigma behind it. So how many guys out there in the field are working their butts off? They're coming home. Do they really want to go and like meet with a therapist or talk to
Right.
somebody?
Yeah.
That's draining. So I think sharing the resources, especially what we have found, and at least leading people to say, here's some things to go and look at,
Yeah.
and just being there to find it, because I think that's one of the hardest things.
I agree. Yeah, we'll have a few things linked in the show notes for you guys to basically get back and kind of learn a little bit more about psychological safety. There's OSHA specific ones, there's like CDC specific ones. So we'll link some of those in the show notes for you guys.
But we appreciate you taking the time with us today. If you have been listening, please go ahead and rate the podcast, the episode. If you're new, please subscribe, follow us on Instagram or LinkedIn, and let us know what you're thinking about what we're doing. Any feedback would be great. So otherwise, hope you have a great rest of your day, night, whatever time of the day it is, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.